Welcome to the monthly meeting, guys. Let's take a seat so we can get started. We've got a packed schedule tonight. Welcome, welcome. Let's take a seat, guys. We've got lots of great speakers tonight that we want to make sure we hear from. Okay, that quieted everybody down pretty quick. All right. Yep, let's take a seat, everybody. Remember, we do have a virtual audience online watching too, so everybody please be seated. Give it a couple more seconds. It's a quiet group tonight. Quiet. Awesome. All right, guys, thank you so much for coming to the May monthly meeting with TIE Atlanta. Some new faces tonight, exciting. If you guys don't know who I am Maya. I am the membership director and events director here at TIE Atlanta. We are so excited about the schedule tonight, the events tonight. We're gonna watch a real quick video though if you're new to TIE Atlanta. Just some quick information about our wonderful programming.
TIE Atlanta provides mentoring, education, funding, and access to up-and-coming entrepreneurs to late-stage companies that are getting ready to exit. From our award-winning youth program for middle school, high school, and university students to our investment arm, TIE Atlanta Angels, the fastest-growing angel investment group in the Southeast, to our growth stage program, Council of Board Advisors, each program meets the entrepreneur where they are. Our events such as the monthly meetings, to workshops, to the annual TIECon Atlanta conference, TIE Atlanta offers something for everyone in their entrepreneurial journey. We are a part of the TIE Global Network, the largest entrepreneur organization in the world with 15,000 members in 61 chapters across 14 countries. TIE is the place to be for mentoring, education, and networking for entrepreneurs in all stages and industries. Welcome to TIE Atlanta.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. Okay, and we have, just like the video said, we have monthly programming, just like this amazing program we're going to have tonight with an incredible headliner, Mark, who's here tonight with us, and then followed by an incredible panel that we'll have as well. And just so you guys know, our next event, I'll repeat at the end again, is our workshop. It'll be in 2 weeks. It's at another amazing partner of ours, ATDC. And Greg Fursery will be heading it up for us. He'll be talking about valuation and ESOP, so a great topic, and we'll have a special guest there as well. Our workshops are a little bit different than our monthly meetings. It's a little bit more tactical and hands-on, so we'd love to see you there. It's for members only. So now I'm going to hand it over to our current president, Sid Mukherjee, to introduce our headliner. Sid.
Thank you, Maya. And welcome to our monthly meeting. And this is a good group. And we typically bring somebody who has made a huge impact on the city and on entrepreneurship. And we are really fortunate to have Mark Buffington here with us tonight. And Mark, you may not know, is the icon for venture investing in the city of Atlanta. So there was a time when Atlanta was considered to be the boonies. Forget anything about technology, forget anything about investing. Atlanta was the place where entrepreneurs didn't want to come to. And in 2006, Mark was one of the first people to kind of try to change that perception by launching BIP Capital. And he has probably made more investments and than most people in the city, and also brought Atlanta to the map. So I would say that with the current incarnation of BIP, which is Panoramic, Mark is, probably, it's one of the best known names in venture capital outside of the Silicon Valley, and made investments in, 80, 90 companies so far, and huge successes in all kinds of industries. Mark is an icon. Again, very fortunate to have you here with us, Mark, today. And Mark is also very generous with his time. When I was about to launch a venture fund, I sought out his advice, and he was very kind and provided me with a lot of guidance, so thank you for that as well. And that's what TIE is all about, and which is another reason why I think Mark is a great fit here. Just one little tidbit about Mark. He's also a Georgia Tech grad, and he also played basketball, varsity basketball for Georgia Tech. Baseball. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. That's right. Okay, so baseball. Okay, some kind of ball. So with that, I'd like to invite Mark and say a few words to us.
Well, nobody's ever called me an icon before, so that's a milestone. That was nice. Thanks for having me. I think it's been, Sid, maybe 4 years since I was here before, and obviously it was the COVID break, so really nice to be back with everyone here. So when Sid called me, he said, "Hey, I want you to come be a keynote speaker," and I said, "What for?" And he said, "Well, I'd like you to talk about diversity and ventures, et cetera." I said, "Are you sure you don't want me to talk about optimal fundraising strategies for founders, or application of real option theory to follow-on rounds, or et cetera, et cetera?" And he said, "No, I want you to talk about something far simpler, diversity." And I said, "Oh, great." And so it's actually quite a complicated topic, and as everyone knows, but happy to be here. I certainly wouldn't claim to be an expert on diversity, and I'm not sure anybody is, but happy to be here and talk about it and share our perspective and how we've approached it, because it's something that's super important to us. But I think we look at it maybe slightly differently than most. So happy to share those thoughts. And I don't know if there's time for a mini Q&A with me after this, but I find that tends to work great after. So I'll be fairly brief in my comments. I made a couple slides. I didn't know I'd get such a great introduction. So, and sorry for sitting, but I've got a bum knee, and as a 51-year-old, I'm staring at a knee replacement. So when I stand too long, but I may get up and walk around. But anyway, so I thought I'd give just a brief overview of Panoramic. As Sid mentioned, I spent a decade in the Bay Area. My background's in econometrics, and so I've always applied that to investing and venture investing. And what I noticed in the early part of the millennium, as I was investing in startup deals on the West Coast, was I started getting, because of the Georgia Tech network, I started getting a bunch of people reaching out and saying, "Hey, I've got this startup. It's in Atlanta, and it's a healthcare startup. I've got $1 million of revenue, and it's a big addressable market, but I'm having trouble finding capital." And I thought to myself, gosh, if that deal were in the Bay Area, there'd be 15 investors lined up to do it. It would be price competitive. It would probably price in the 30 million pre-money valuation range. And I said, "Well, hey, what are you looking for?" And they said, "Well, we'd take $1 million on a 4 million pre." Okay, I'll be on a plane. I'll be in Atlanta as quickly as I can be there. And that, really just by this kind of trial and error, I discovered, what at the time as a hedge fund manager I thought was an arbitrage opportunity, and it was. So moved, picked up the family. Once I saw that opportunity, picked up the family. It was a risk at the time, and I agree. Sid called it the boonies, and a lot of people on the West Coast are like, "Are you nuts? What are you thinking?" And as it's turned out, and I'll show you some stats on that in a minute, not to be boastful at all, but probably the greatest decision I've ever made. It's been incredibly rewarding. I appreciate being called an icon. I really believe, like Frank Teague is here, and I say this to everybody, like, the investments that Georgia and the state and Atlanta made in things like the ATDC were just brilliant, roughly 40 years ago. And I showed up here at the perfect time. I didn't know it at the time. I had a hunch, but I got to kind of ride the downhill of all the hard work that was built in the infrastructure, and it's really just made it for just a tremendous career. So, but just a little bit about us. I moved back 17 years ago. I founded BIP Capital. We manage about $4 billion. Most people don't know, but we manage a very large private debt portfolio. But we started creating a lot of confusion in the market because we're most known for our venture investing. So we just rebranded all of our products. So our venture product is called Panoramic Ventures today. Since the return to Atlanta, we've invested about $600 million in venture. I lead the venture strategy and the private equity strategy. And proud to say, and hopefully it's not boastful, but just that thesis and combined with working with a bunch of great founders and all the infrastructure and support the city provides has allowed us to drive really incredible returns, net returns to investors of 27.1% for the last 17 years. So just by all accounts, a tremendous run. There's a lot of luck involved in that. A lot of pieces came together, but very, very humbling to be a part of that. So that's the background, and our focus is really simple. We're a fiduciary for investors first and foremost. That's what we wake up every day to do, to drive returns for them. But we have to balance that because we're a steward. Make sure I did. Oops, sorry. We're a steward for founders' dreams, and that's a careful balance. But we find when we align that that great things happen. 1 + 1 equals much more than 2, and that's our focus every day. It's what our team wakes up to do. I don't do as many deals, so 2 years ago I was sitting on 12 boards. Consciously, I've now taken that down to 4, and our team is doing a lot of those deals, but that's what they wake up every day to do, is to help founders achieve their dreams. I'd say 98% of the time, those conversations are very collaborative, and sometimes they're not as collaborative. And like a technologist who's never built a Salesforce or something, who thinks they really know about how to drive top of the funnel leads, sometimes we have to bring people in that have done that for much longer. But almost always, they're very collaborative discussions, and it really is very rewarding to watch. I was talking again to Frank about another founder that we paired with a CEO in a business, and to watch the growth and what he's done, it really is a privilege. It's a great career. It's not a job, and it's so much fun to do that. So for those of you who are angel investing, I think it's a very special calling. I won't bore you guys, but I pulled slides from all over the place to kind of try to ultimately get to talk about diversity and how we do this. I pulled slides from our fund pitch deck, our internal strategy deck, our diversity deck, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's why the fonts are all different on these, but I thought it would be authentic. And so our focus culminates in a clear set of value propositions for 2 audiences, our investors first, and then the founders that we serve. And we innovate around that. I won't bore you guys to tears. If you want to talk about it in Q&A, I'll be happy to go back to the slide and talk about it. And that you might ask, well, that's great, Mark. How does all of that and all of your strategy really tie into diversity? And I would say diversity is one of the main secret weapons we have. If anybody's paid attention to our branding and all of our taglines, we take a wider view, we're looking for you, we're looking for overlooked founders. And I didn't really have it culminated and well thought out when I moved back from San Francisco, but in many ways, we were going to look at overlooked founders and those in different geographies that nobody was paying attention to. And that taught me a valuable lesson. And then as I started to evolve my own thinking and actually started to have some success so I could do that and not just worry about putting food on the table, I started noticing that there are plenty of other founders that are overlooked, either because they're a female or because they're people of color or what have you. And so we really developed this thesis around, how do we go serve the overlooked founders and the people that don't get a chance? And that, again, that has been a huge competitive advantage for us. So that's really the first comment there. We take a wider view. We're looking for opportunities where others don't. And I can't tell you, we're frequently in deals, and some of the, now that we've established ourselves, some of the largest funds in the world, we just did a deal with KKR. Insight Ventures are asking, where do you find all this stuff? And I'm like, hey, you'll never know. And so, but that's, I think that's a big part of our strategy and why we've been successful. The other thing we find is being accessible is important. And until I started really studying this and thinking about it, I grew up white. I went to Georgia Tech. I had a built-in network. People started calling me with opportunity. But unless you grew up in the right spot or had the right opportunities, you just don't have those networks. And I just never thought about that when I was a middle classer coming out trying to just, support a family and all that. But as I started to think more about it, so we do a lot of work to try to make ourselves accessible. We run a startup showdown, if some of you guys have been to that. People apply online. It's a fairly extensive application, so you have to answer a lot of questions, but we don't know if you're white or black or what have you, and we score those. We don't know if you're a male or a female. We find that out later. And it turns out by just kind of looking at a standard set of criteria that you just kind of look at the world entirely different, and you start to open your mind to opportunities that for one reason or another, they never got in your office, or they might say things a different way when they walk into your office, or whatever sends it down a path of not being as likely to fund. This process yields a lot of equity, if you will, on the front end of the process. And so interestingly enough, and this is not by design, we've had 12, we do it monthly. That was a strategic mistake, by the way. These things are hard to put on. So we'll probably move to quarterly. But for a while, we're going to do a monthly. But we've done 12 of them, and only one was a white male that won. And this is all judge voted, and they get to a certain point. So I think, and that's just totally happenstance. And we're looking for the best ideas. We say internally we're a ruthless meritocracy of ideas. The best win, and that's the results, which I think is, it's a small sample, but it's super interesting. Product innovation, I won't talk a lot about that. And driving alignment, this is something I will talk about. The other thing that we're pushing, so if there are other fund managers in here, they'll know how hard this is when I say it. But we've started what we call the 100% equity initiative. And we're not at full compliance, we're almost, but the idea is that 100% of the employees in our portfolio companies have equity in the companies that they're working in. And that's actually quite rare. Founders like to hold on to their equity. But we've spent a lot, so we have 87% compliance on that now. We're still pushing. It's a little harder earlier, but we tend to win the day on that longer term. And you got to, Sid knows this as an investor, you got to be a little careful how you suggest that, or you put people off. And but I think we've made a nice case. It's a big part of it. But what we're finding is, for example, PlayOn, we just exited, PlayOn Sports, not fully exited, partially exited. And what we're seeing for the first time is females and people of color are starting to reinvest in the ecosystem. So I think that's a great sign that this is working. I didn't put our returns up to boast, just to say that we serve investors. This strategy and the way we go to market, looking where others don't, has driven again world-class returns. We measure ourselves against other funds. And we've put up numbers that frankly are just I never imagined that we could do, and I think it's a culmination of, again, great team, diverse team, but also just finding opportunity that others aren't looking for, and then helping and nurturing those companies in the right way and being aligned. So how does that all translate to impact and our commitment to impact and diversity? My personal opinion, and I'm sure this will be controversial and make for a good panel, is that the acronym diversity, equity, and inclusivity is kind of backwards. What we find is that we focus on equity and inclusivity, diversity naturally happens. And if you look at all sorts of academic studies on the subject, what you find is that founders and employers are much more likely to hire other employees or to appoint board members that are of the same race. And then if you dig deeper, they're much more likely to hire employees or appoint board members who went to the same colleges they did, or have the same level of education, or they come from the same socioeconomic level that they did. And I experienced that firsthand when I was kind of a middle classer and just, again, trying to survive. A lot of doors closed, and I could not get into doors. I'm sure a lot of people always think, oh, that was easy. I promise you it wasn't. We're still not invited into the Ivy League. I always have to kind of, I went to Georgia Tech, and some of these, high-end Ivy League, endowments will look at you like, yeah, great. And so, that kind of exclusivity exists everywhere. And but that's what we find. And so when we thought about, well, how do we make the most impact? It's invest in diverse founders. They will go find the boards. They will hire employees that are diverse. And that's exactly what's happening today. I'll talk about that on the next slide. So that's what we focused on. The other thing that, Sid will be able to identify this. At the end of the day, we're minority investors, so we don't control who they put on their boards. We're begging for our own board seat when we get into certain deals. And so to come in and say, hey, not only do we want a board seat, but really I'd like you to put a female or a person of color on the board, you'd be laughed out of the room. You'd probably lose the deal. And so I think that's different. If you're a control investor, you probably have a lot more control. But in venture, that's just really hard to do. And I would assume if you went in and started suggesting who their advisory board, how many founders are in the room, just out of curiosity? Yeah. So if I invested in you and came to you and told you how to build your advisory board, I'm sure that would feel great. And so it's hard to do, right? It's hard for us to influence as a minority investor. That said, we make our values clear. We make what we're trying to impact clear. We make those metrics clear. And then slowly but surely, as trust is built in the investment, we hope that good things happen. But the most impact we can make is by investing in diverse founders. And so the moral of the story is that, by investing in diverse founders and teams, we're aligning ourselves with kind of natural human tendencies, the cognitive biases that will drive more diversity, and that's working. Like if I look at our companies that we've invested in that has a black founder that's leading it, they tend to have more black advisory board members and more black board members. The same's true. Actually, the interesting part about that data is females seem to be much more enlightened. They're just like, let's pick the best people, and that's the truth. I mean, we look at this all the time. There's some great academic studies on this, but as we observe the other approach, like simply appointing women or people of color to boards, what we don't see is that those management teams or the others become really diverse. And I think there's a ton of studies. Those aren't just our studies, and our sample's relatively small in this. But the academic studies would bear that out. And so our view is, and I'll show you some stats on the next slide on diversity impact, is we really think by looking where others don't, we're able to have our cake and eat it too, which is drive great returns, but also get diversity and impact and start to build a community that really starts to pay forward and it starts to feed on itself. And we're seeing some of that. So I thought I would just close by sharing a couple stats. So 44% of our historic portfolio are led by females or people of color. By the way, I took this out of our pitch deck slide, so that's why you say we set the standard. I wouldn't normally come here and say that, but it's almost half of our portfolio are females, people of color, and you saw the returns that we were driving. I think it's thank you. And but I think again we've tried to diversify our team. 3 years ago, I sat in a Metro Atlanta Chamber meeting where they were talking about diversity in venture, and we had been looking for, by the way, it's not, many people know one of my main business partners is Dr. Paul Judge, black entrepreneur, has been super successful. He's kind of a celebrity or local celebrity and famous, but he's one of the general partners there. But it is really, really hard to hire a female venture lead. And because everybody wants them, there are fewer of them, and they're like the pricing is like through the roof, and it's so we're trying really hard, but that is actually a tough one. But of our 37 employees, 16 are either females or people of color. One of the 5 general partners is black. 3 of the 8 managers are either female or black, and this has opened up all these worlds and networks to us that nobody's fishing in, and it just works perfectly for look where others don't and drive great returns. Maybe on community impact, I'll skip over except for the second point. I mean, there's some interesting things happening here. We started measuring, maybe a couple points I'll make. If you haven't read the book, The Triple Threat, it talks about people that come out of certain cultures and certain socioeconomic situations and why they're so good to back as entrepreneurs. We started measuring, I love backing middle classers with a chip on their shoulder. That's kind of where I came from. But they're gritty, they're tough, they get up when they get knocked down, all the things that you want. That doesn't mean we won't fund a good, Ivy League or third generation with a great idea, but just, at the end of the day, most of the success we've driven and most of the exits we've driven are from people that are first generation wealth. So we started measuring that. We believe we've created 192 first-time millionaires since we came to Atlanta, and we talked about compassionate capitalism. We call it inclusive capitalism. But as we started diversifying our team, and then the companies that we started invested in started to look more diverse, for the first time, we're now having females and people of color get their first big checks and reinvest in the ecosystem. So again, we've only been doing this for 4 or 5 years, so I can't sit up here and make any kind of empirical comments, but at least the early trends are look outstanding. So we'll see. By the way, we still have to keep doing this right. So it's, and so I think that's important. But I wanted to make that point. And, we try to make an impact where we work and live. I will say this, I probably shouldn't, it's bad strategy, but about 50% of our portfolio now is outside of the Southeast. If you would have looked 5 to 8 years ago, it was almost all in the Southeast, and then the predominance was in Atlanta. But we are still highly tied to Georgia Tech, and it's an engine for us. And so we talk about community impact jobs, how many jobs we're creating, how they're paid versus others. And then I'll close by just talking about our commitment to ESG. I'm really focused on the S. We don't invest in a lot of hard green science or green tech. And governance to me is table stakes. If you're in business and you're in private companies, you need to run high quality boards that are ethical, et cetera. So it's surprising that even has to be a thing. Right, so, but the S part is important to us, and so I mentioned earlier the 100% equity inclusivity initiative. We're at 87% compliance. We don't control this, but I'm hoping we're going to get to 100%. We've partnered with other funds that are doing this now, and so if there are fund managers in and they want to see how we're doing this and all the education on this, happy to share that. And then we started a fair wage policy, which gets into all sorts of benchmarking between genders and benchmarking between people of color, but also just, how are we paying? And I think a lot of the compensation data is screwed up because it includes so many people, but we always say the same thing, like, look, we're looking for exceptionally talented people, and I'm not looking to pay exceptionally talented people at the average. That doesn't make a lot of sense. And so how do we really decile that pay and think about that? And so that's our fair wage policy, a much more targeted policy. So anyway, sorry, I talked a little longer than I planned, but that's our vision or version of how we focus on impact and diversity, and particularly equity and inclusivity. And if I have time, I'll take some questions, but if not, I'll sit down. Yeah. I think he's going to go. Sorry.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming out here. I'm curious of what you think when you're talking about diversity. That's the hot word right now. But in many cases, when you look at politics and how it's being applied, it's less a question of quality of the person than the color of the skin. I think the quality gets lost sometimes in a lot of cases when you talk about diversity, how it's spoke about, particularly in the political realm. And we look at the issue of ESG, it's kind of the same thing.
Yeah.
So the Constitution and people looking at the quality of the person as opposed to the color of the skin. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think, first of all, that's like a very dangerous question for a white man to answer, but I take risks for a living, so I'll roll the dice here. So I totally agree with you. I mean, I think, I didn't grow up black and I didn't grow up a female, so I'm sure there's been a lot of privilege afforded to me that I don't even recognize, right? And I've certainly learned, like in being partners with Paul Judge, a guy that by any stretch, I mean, he's like, you walk into it, like it's fun to walk into a room with him because nobody knows who I am, and right, and so you're like, I mean, the guy's a celeb, and but then listening to him about the things that he had to overcome to get to where he is versus the things I had to overcome, it's just like nuts. And I have to tell you, because he's a partner now, I half the time suspect when we're pitching to a certain institution that it impacts our pitch. Like they're already pre-forming thoughts in their head because I have a black partner that I never dealt with. I don't know if that's true. Nobody ever tells you like, hey, I'm going to discriminate against you. And so I think that's true. But on the flip side of that is to be honest, those numbers on the 44%, I don't have a mandate to go invest in a bunch of females or people of color. I just take the best ideas and the best people and creates even playing fields and opportunity. We have a saying that talent's everywhere, but opportunity's not. I just try to level that playing field, and those are the results. I'm sure that would offend some people because I don't have a strong diversity mandate, but that doesn't mean we're not trying to do the right thing. So I totally agree with you. I'm focused on real impact. I have to say, on this particular topic, I find so much virtue signaling that's going on and people trying to gain from that, and it's just not how we built our business. You know, anybody who's ever partnered with me knows, for better or worse, so I said I was a baseball player. I was not a pitcher, but I have one pitch, fastball down the middle. I'm going to tell you exactly what I think. I'm not going to be rude about it, but I'm not going to pull punches or mince words, and I just really think that, you know, I just loathe when I see somebody virtue signaling and I go, well, what kind of impact have you actually made, and how are you measuring that? And then, you know, then somehow I'm bad for asking that question, but I totally agree with you. I think that I would rather see more people focused on real results, real economic impact, job opportunities for founders than I would like, hey, we did a big headline. I mean, just one more comment on this. Like, you know, after the George Floyd thing, all these big brands came out and announced how much money they were going to put into black communities and the like. Nobody's gone to check to see how much money they put in, but I can assure you that it ain't that much. But they get the headline value, and that just shoot me if that ever becomes us. So sorry to be so direct about that, but anyway. Fastball. Yeah, fastball. There it is.
I'm going to kind of follow that fastball theme. If virtue signaling is one side of things, on the other side there is, and I guess I've found myself in a few situations where it's a situation of like, it's a conference for minorities, and like, so why am I there as a white guy? And like, yes, I'm your ally, maybe you need to get to know me to believe that, but like, how do you deal with that? Just, if you don't mind me throwing that curveball, maybe that's not a fastball?
I may be taking this too far. Is the question like, do we experience reverse racism? Or if I'm like a white guy in a room full of black people, do I sometimes feel a little bit like a duck out of water?
I don't care about feeling like a duck out of water, and I don't mind kind of having to be uncomfortable as things balance. I guess I more mean as like, how do you approach those people that are like, why are you here? This is a women's investment thing. And I'm like, because, you know, my wife's doing XYZ, or because I'm in business development, or, you know, for one of the 1,000 very logical reasons that has nothing to do with me being a woman, you know, like.
Well, first of all, Sid's one of the only people that can convince me to do an evening, seminar. Yeah, but so I don't go to a lot of those anymore. I'm highly involved. I mean, like, as I've cut back the charities for impact and all that. So I'm not sure I'm a great person to answer that. But our team, if they're invited somewhere, I think it's our job to create a brand that knows we're there for a reason and we're there for impact and what we stand for. And which, again, it's simple for a reason. We drive great returns for investors, and we make impacts in the communities that we invest in. I think if we show up and people are looking at us like, why the hell are you here, then we didn't do a good job branding and marketing. But I don't see a lot of that. I will say, like, when I first became friends with Paul Judge, he received a Benny Award at Morehouse, and he invited me, and I didn't even think to ask him what the event was. And then, you know, I was maybe one of 5 white people in the room, and I'd said to my wife, like, didn't imagine this, but it was a great experience. I'd be lying if I said I didn't walk in the room and like, whoa, wait a minute, I may be the only white guy here. Why did they invite me? So, but no, I don't think about that a lot, to be honest. And I think, you know, it's our job to brand what we stand for. And I figure if somebody invites us there, they get that. So.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
So, you know, what are the top 3 criteria that you look for in startups when you invest? So what are the top 3 criteria that you look for in startups? This is your expertise, right? So you've been doing it since 2006 or even earlier than that. So there are lots of aspiring angel investors, maybe even venture capitalists in this room. So what is it that you advise them to look for?
Yeah, I think, so there's a famous academic debate, the horse or the jockey. There's no right answer, or maybe I think there is, but the idea is, do you invest in the concept or the idea, and that's where you place your weight, or do you invest in the person running it? I think, you know, so the academic evidence would suggest, in other words, that the horse is a better bet. Sorry for the founders in the room. I'm a founder too. But the power of the idea, I've seen like, I got one right now. It's driving me. I mean, these guys, you know, if you've heard the expression, they drove a venture clown car into a gold mine. But man, they cannot manage anything. But the thing is going straight up and to the right, and we're going to try to figure out how to, you know, land the plane. But in general, I'm a horse guy, and so that means that there is, if any of you guys have had and gals have had the privilege of meeting a guy named Merrick First at Georgia Tech, he talks about something called authentic demand. We thought about that a lot and changed it to compulsory demand. They're just things in your life that you're just compelled to do, like your iPhone. You pick it up all day, and there's certain things, like we're looking for things like that, where there's some problem or some unmet need where the buyer or the user is just absolutely compelled to pick up the product and use it. Then it has to be a big market. Like the one thing that I always tell early, early venture or angel investors is, and I did this, I was guilty of this, is invested in relatively small markets and you'll have small outcomes because the market's like that. The next buyer that comes along will say, well, gosh, you guys did a good job of getting it here, but there's not that much blue ocean left, and therefore we're going to pay you a lower number. And so, we kind of figured that one out early in the hard way and said, we're only going to invest in things with a very large addressable but also accessible market where that buyer is completely compelled. And then the holy grail on that is, if you see that situation, compelled buyer and really large market and unmet opportunity, and then limited competition or limited substitutes, that's a great scenario. So to me, that's the horse. We focus on the market first, and then the next is, okay, I found a great market. How prepared is this team and that founder to go capture that market? And I tell everybody, again, here's the fastball thing. Like this, if you've never started a company, this is blood sport. You'll have some of the lowest lows and the highest highs that you've ever had. I get them all the time. I'm going to have to run out at 7:25. Hope I can stay the whole time. But I had a founder out of Minneapolis call me. He's panicking because we're trying to sell the business, and the buyer, we have 3 or 4 people at the table, but he's kind of pre-selected wrongly, one of the buyers, and they faded their bid by about 15%, and his whole life's coming to an end. And I'm going to try to teach it, walk. We're going to walk away, and we're just not going to return their phone call, and then I promise you they'll come back and we'll land the bid. But how prepared? I mean, that matters. That matters in his return. It matters in our return. And so how prepared are they to do all the things that it takes to get to that point and then actually land the plane at that point? And, then lastly, I think just personally, one of the things I noticed as I started to scale our team. This, by the way, the scaling our venture team has been the hardest challenge I've ever taken on because I had all this stuff in my head, but I never had to put it out to people and make sure that they understood it so we could build a cohesive investment strategy. All of that. And so, really focusing on the difference between good, great, and exceptional. That's actually really hard to do because, Sid, this now, the pipeline. You see a lot of really good companies, but being patient enough to wait for the exceptional, even pass on the great. I think the measure of a great venture fund is that your anti-portfolio, the stuff you don't do, is also outstanding, but you had a chance to do it. And that took me a while to figure out, but so those are the 3 things. It's, great horse, great market, great opportunity, compelled buyers, prepared team, and exceptional, not great or good. Yeah.
So Mark, great job. I really appreciate it. Thank you for all you've done for these last 15 years because
Right.
It's really made a difference. I want to focus in on what you said, 191 millionaires. One of the things I'm most proud of is how many millionaires my companies are my angel
Yeah.
investments. But my question is, John Chambers just recently said, if I were to start a company now, Cisco, I would have done it in Atlanta. One of the things that Silicon Valley has done very well is they've got multiple millionaires that keep investing again and again and again.
Yeah.
For the first time, we've got that now with you and Paul, and Paul's Tom Noonan, such a prolific investor.
Yeah.
Of those 191 companies, 191 millionaires, is that what it was?
Yeah.
How many jobs, how many millionaires have they started? Do you know? Because I think that would be a great statistic to celebrate.
So I can tell you, we absolutely shame them. If I gave them money and they're not willing to reinvest some of that back into the community, I'd no problem shaming them into that. And I'd say we're successful about 85% of the time. There are some founders that I think, their life dream is, hey, I put $10 million in my pocket. Or they're at the lake, right? And those are hard to identify. By the way, the other thing is no founder ever comes in and tells you hey, I want your money and we're going to $1 billion. And then if a good business model is if the first $50 million check they see to get off the table, a lot of them are heading for the exits. And So that part of our job is to structure, I said product innovation earlier, part of our job is to structure, how do we get you a little liquidity so you get the courage to keep going? And look, if you're a middle classer and that's right, and this is life-changing money and you got a family to support, I totally understand that. I was in the same situation. And so it's our job to build products that make it easier for them to go further and further with us than without us or getting off the table. And so, but no, we shame them into investing. And I'd never measured the follow-on millionaire effect. I should, that's a good thing to think about. Yeah, that's right. That's a great idea, yeah. But we are very prideful about getting our founders and their management teams to reinvest in the ecosystem. And, you know, and there's a lot to think about there, but I've never thought about the follow-on millionaire effect. That's actually kind of cool.
I think it's, again, when John Chambers says that,
Yeah.
he says that if I would do it again, I would do it in Atlanta.
Yeah,
To really make that work, we got to get that flywheel going.
yeah, for sure.
191 is a big number.
Yep,
That's a
for
big-
sure.
Each of those 191 have 5, then we're up to 700.
Yeah. Well, that's the other thing. We're finding it's exponential because it's coming on both sides, the investor side and the entrepreneur side now. So, yeah, no, it's a great suggestion. Yeah.
Okay, I wish we had time for more questions, but we don't. Thank you so much. Let's hear it up for Mark, the icon.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much, Mark. That was awesome. Okay, so now I'm actually going to bring up the lovely lady that was just speaking, Karen Robinson Cope. She is going to be our moderator tonight for the panel. I'm going to have her introduce the 2 panelists this evening. Karen, I'm going to hand it over to you if you want to sit here.
Here, I'm here. So before Mark leaves, let's give another big round of applause. Thank you, Mark. Fascinating. Love the story. Really appreciate it. Thank you. And thanks for all you're doing for Atlanta. It's a great story. Well, guys, it's a pleasure to see you all here tonight. What a beautiful day we had in Atlanta, Georgia. Yeah. They don't have those days in Silicon Valley. But anyway, what I wanted to do is, Madhu, if you could come up as well, and Kit. I appreciate you all taking the time tonight. Tonight we're going to talk about something that Mark talked about, which is the importance of boards. And I know we all have this vision of what is a board. A board is when you're a public company, when you're $1 billion in revenue, when you're whatever. And I think we're going to tell you tonight, that's not the right answer. The right answer is you need a board much earlier than you're probably thinking about. And the folks up here have been on both sides of that equation. We're going to hear a little bit about why they think the board's important, how you structure a board, et cetera. Let me tell you that this program that we started at TIE is called the Council of Board Advisors. I was a judge for about 5 or 6 years for Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year. And I found, and when I was judging these companies, there was these fascinating, fabulous companies. And it was probably the first time I was a judge was probably in 2011, 2012. And I realized these great companies, when they hit a recession, many of them went actually out of business. And I think, how could you be the top company 2 years ago, and then a recession comes and you're out of business? And when you started to drill down, you realize many of those companies were so busy focusing on the business that they didn't really think about the business, the 30,000 foot. They were too busy in the paying the vendors and getting employees and making sure that the product is shipped and so forth, which are all very, very important. But to really, again, grow the business, you really need to think at a higher level and think, how do I make sure I'm thinking about the business from a higher level? So I started a program with Ty about 10 years ago called Council of Board Advisors, and the idea was to bring in people, experienced executives. Either they could be entrepreneurs that have sold the business, like Mark said, or they could be corporate executives who maybe have retired, or just at a point in their life they want to give back. And most people, when they are at that point in their life, they give back and they plant a tree. Wonderful to plant a tree. They go back, they help the homeless. Wonderful to help the homeless. Those are all wonderful things. But there's a group of us that really, our skill is really running businesses. And so we wanted to say, what's the best thing I can do is give back by helping a business. I'm not very good at planting a tree. I'm definitely not good at, singing or anything else. But I can help a business run. So we put together a program called Council of Board Advisors. The idea is when a company has grown, it's profitable, but it's looking to get to that next point. It's an inflection point, and they say, how do I go from 5 million to 10 million? How do I go from 50 million to 100 million? How do I go from 150 to 300? Those kind of questions. And you typically need someone to think about the business from a completely different level. And so we started the business. I'm not a big believer in proliferating nonprofits. And so the first thing I did when I started it is I looked around for a place to house it. And my good friend Raj said to me, oh, no, 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 you don't need to do it yourself. You need to bring it to TIE because we service the whole life cycle of the entrepreneur. Got excited about that. We brought it in. We've done probably a dozen companies over the last 10 years. We've had some great success stories. And I think in particular, Madhu has been with me from the beginning, has done a number of companies with me. I think you'll see why it's valuable. We'll talk a little bit about what's the difference between a fiduciary board, which we all hear about, and just an advisory board, which is what we do at COBA. And then Kit, my new best friend, has just brought on a COBA board, and he's going to talk a little bit about why now, why he didn't do it before, and so forth. So thank you for being here with us tonight. I'm going to start by turning it over to Kit to talk a little bit about who you are, why you're doing a board, et cetera.
Okay, thanks. So, wait, what was the order again?
Just tell me about Look, Listen, and I know, you've been at
Yeah,
a couple weeks.
yeah.
I know.
Okay, so our company is, it's got sort of three aspects to it. Look Listen is part digital marketing agency, part production company, part media company. And over the years, we grew into all of those things. We didn't start out with that fully formed. We had a strategic vision. And over the years, we're completely self-funded. We'll turn 15 this year. And for the first 4 to 5 years, I actually worked a full-time job at a big Dutch company while we tried to sort of figure things out through the financial crisis. And I was really driven to build something special, like most entrepreneurs, but I was really driven to build something special. I wanted to improve people's qualities of life, and ultimately today we've arrived at this employee value proposition that I think sums it up really, really well, which is that we are a creative platform for a diverse group of people to practice their art forms. And that right now is manifesting in those sort of three areas that I just talked about as a company. But what we really, I went through the things as an entrepreneur. You start off likely with a co-founder. And then you move on to the thing of building a management team, and then you move on to the other list of things. In our case, it was to open up a second office and then a third office, and in different time zones. And the role of the board for me for many years was, or this idea of having a board of advisors was something that some people asked me, but I sort of felt like I was smart enough. I felt like I was smart enough to sort of navigate all of the things that, all those different stages. I did a good enough job selecting the right accountant. I did a good enough job establishing a banking relationship, and the list goes on. And then several years ago, as we started to hit some bumps in the road that were very evident by my own blind spots and that of my leadership team and the subsequent management teams, we really started to, me specifically, I bought out my co-founder, so I became 100% owner of the company, and really started to find myself even sort of struggling with keeping up with the next things on the list of strategic growth plans and looking for potential sources of capital. And what does that do to me as someone that has had this identity as a completely self-funded entrepreneur? And so, one of the things specifically that I mentioned to Karen that I wanted to share was that sort of the cognitive load that I had to sort of get over when it came to actually admitting that I needed a board and getting over some of those vulnerable places of feeling like it was a sign of weakness, especially as a white male, where you have, you're supposed to know all these things, and you're supposed to, because as white males we have this hidden curriculum that we're raised with that put us at this advantage. And Karen, you stop me at any point that I need to move on, so because I'll keep going, because I get really passionate about this topic. But I'll seal this piece off, and then we can move on real quick. But what was really important for me, that moment in time in which I really felt like what a board could bring. The whole time I knew the value, and I felt like I realized at call it the end of my struggle, where I felt like I truly did lock in more to seeing that it was not a moment of weakness. It was an accelerant, in fact, to many initiatives that we wanted to accomplish as a company for a wide range of reasons. And we chose a board. We worked with Karen and Eric to choose a board. I have very deep feelings about diversity and live those out in action. And they were very patient with me as we selected the people that were on the board, but I have firm beliefs that if a white male is running the company and owns the company, the board should not have any white men on it.
And we don't.
And we don't have any white men on the board. So my experience with COBA was in sort of selecting that as a process was this sort of embracing of my own ideals of what business should be, because I see Look Listen as my own country. It's the United States of Look Listen. And I may not, I run a sizable business that we do have to fall, with the clients that we work with, we have to fall into some level of regulation. But I don't have to wait for the Supreme Court to tell me to do something or not to do. If I treat this as my own company, I can create the world that I want to live in, which is beautifully diverse. And I mean the holistic definition of diverse, with age, ethnic, race, gender, neurodiversity, all of those things is the world that I want to create. So we're trying to do that in our company. I will stop there and hand it back so that we can.
Thank you,
go
Kit.
on to the
So
next thing.
I want to draw your attention to two items he said. The first thing he said that's very important is he had a great accountant. You had a great legal team.
Yeah.
You had great, so a lot of people immediately say, oh, well, my board's going to be my accountant and my lawyer, and maybe we'll throw one or two other. Those guys are not your advisors, guys. Those are your paid vendors. So let's get it clear. They have a different agenda. So that's the first thing. The second thing I think it's great to understand, you run a very successful company. I've met the employees, I've met the team. It's a great company. Why does he need a board? And yet he came to a point where he said, you know what? There's some bigger opportunities for me to take advantage of, and I'm ready to listen. And I just love your humility about it's time for me to take it to the next level. Our first board meeting was a couple weeks ago, and it was just terrific. But let me turn it over to Madhu, because you've been on many, many boards. One in particular you and I were on, and it was a challenging company, and then it went and sold for $1 billion. Not quite, but did an amazing job. And it was really teetering for a while. And you has built a practice around helping companies sell or exit, and part of that is your board. Talk a little bit about your background and that whole story.
Sure, thanks, Karen. I started my career running a software and training company. And so I was in operations most of the time. And then when we were looking to scale, I was forced to move out of operations into looking at, how do you buy companies? And so we had no idea on how to go about this process. So we ended up finding somebody like Goldman Sachs to advise us on this process. And that opened this whole world of looking at, acquiring companies. How do you assess them? How do you evaluate them? How do you do due diligence? And how do you keep them going? Because entrepreneurs, when they move into a corporation, how do you keep that spirit alive? Nobody wants to be in a cage, especially entrepreneurs. And the first fear that you have is, will that energy dissipate? Will they get put off by all the traditional constraints of working in a larger organization? So that became a very important part. And as I started looking at that more and more, I found that there are a huge number of mistakes entrepreneurs make. And it just has to do, it's not that they're not intelligent, it's not that they don't have business experience, but it is just the situation that they are in and their own inclination. Most of them have become entrepreneurs out of choice, not out of compulsion. They have stepped out of traditional corporate roles which gave them a steady paycheck, and they believed in something, and they went against the grain to start something, and irrespective of family tension, societal tension, cash flow tension, the fear of mortgaging your home and losing it, in spite of all those fears, you max out your credit cards, you push out your vendors, you beg, borrow, whatever, right? to make that company succeed. And it's that drive, in a way, that conflicts with your ability to take advice. And it's actually, people who have kind of made that mistake once of saying, I know it all, nobody knows this business like I do, right? And once you have gone through that up and down of getting hurt in that process, then you realize, hey, it's not smarts, it's not anything, it's just that no one is an island. And if I have to succeed, I have to tap into resources, right? So a lot of, analogies, if you're going to climb Mount Everest, you go with a Sherpa, right? Because you have to navigate a whole host of things you have never seen before. And that's really the true value of having somebody with you on your journey, somebody who's been there, has a variety of experiences to share with you. And that's really the function of the board, or a board of advisors, or even mentors.
Thank you very much. And I just want to talk a little bit about, again, so I think there's some misconceptions about a board. And I'm going to ask Madhu if you can talk a little bit about, there's a difference between a fiduciary board, and many of you, let me show of raise of hands, how many of you are founders? We did this before. And how many of you founders own 100% of your company? A lot of you. So you're like, why do I need someone to tell me what to do with my assets? These are my assets. We got it. And I think it's important to understand the difference, because we made a big distinction between a fiduciary board, a board of directors, who's responsible for all the shareholders, versus a board of advisors who's really about you and your assets. Take a little minute, if you wouldn't mind, Madhu, and talk a little bit more about that.
Sure. So a lot of times there's a lot of confusion about what is what. And in a traditional sense, the board of directors is essentially responsible to the shareholders about what's happening in the company. And a big part of that role is governance, right? Is the company compliant? Is it performing up to societal expectations, governmental expectations? That's the role. And that's a very formal role, and it comes with a lot of responsibilities, because typically a board is composed of independent directors and sometimes employee directors or founder directors, etc. So that combination. So there is a certain number of independent directors that you have on the board, so that you have an independent perspective. Otherwise, it's the same group that's running the company and running the board. And you miss out on these perspectives of, especially around governance. So this also comes with liability for the member of the board. So a director is, since it's a fiduciary responsibility, there is therefore a higher level of concern for anybody who's stepping onto the board. So the board of advisors is actually solves that issue. So since the advisors are not formally part of a board, right, and it's an advisory board and not the board of the company, you don't have any of these issues around liability, right? And that really helps, because then it's easier to access experts to be part of your board of advisors, because they are not worried now about liability related issues. So it's a good way of getting started. As you get investments, right, and you become larger, then you're forced to have a board of directors. And having a board of advisors is actually a good baby step towards learning on how to work with a board of directors. And the culture shock of being 100% owner of the company, calling all the shots, and suddenly having to work with a board of directors, that culture shock can be quite significant. And the board of advisors is a good stepping stone to prepare yourself voluntarily, saying, hey, I'm going to treat this board of advisors like my board of directors, and I'm going to share with them my plans, get their feedback, act on it, and then I'm going to share with them my performance. So even if they may have zero equity in my company, zero actual control over my company, I will work with them as if they do, as if they have control. And I will report to them, and that makes me a much more disciplined entrepreneur. Because one of the issues with entrepreneurs who are flying solo is they have to prepare a budget for whom? They have to put down their strategic plan for whom? They have to do a monthly review for whom? So a lot of times, especially if the business is successful, a lot of these things tend to be very weak because things are going well, right? But you may actually miss on a greater opportunity, or when things turn south, like recession, etc., then you're caught completely unprepared and you don't know what to do. So these are some of the reasons why you would look at board of advisors as a stepping stone to a board of directors, which will be forced on you anyway. So think of it that way. And again, board of advisors, you would have already done some work in that area. Like, for example, you ask somebody about, a legal aspect, about incorporating a company or trademarks. So you're in a way realizing that there are a whole host of areas around which you don't have expertise. And you need to go and ask somebody. And that somebody could be a paid professional, your accountant, attorney, or whatever, or it could be a mentor, where you say, hey, I have this difficult situation with this employee, do you have any suggestions for me? And so you already do mentoring, you look for mentoring in some fashion. This is really a little more structure to that, from mentoring to board of advisors, and then an even more formal structure to the board of directors.
That's a great point. And Eric and I have worked. Eric, if you could stand up or raise your hand. Eric is my co-chair with COBA. And one of the things we've found, we've actually put together kind of a template for how you should run these companies. And one of the best advantages, which we don't think about, I mean, Kit and I talked about this, is forcing you to think about your business as a third party would think about it. So it provides a discipline that you kind of think you have, but all of a sudden when you've got to, like you said, like Manu said, when you have to give a analysis or a report on a monthly or quarterly basis to your board, it causes a discipline that's very healthy. Again, Kit, you run a very successful company. Why now, and what are you hoping to accomplish?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. Why now? So because I gave my commitment years ago to COBA. I met with Paul for coffee over at Alon's, just right over here. This was years ago. And I said, we're gonna do it. Maybe it was like 5 years ago. No. And it was embarrassingly long ago. And then he gave me a hard time about it by not moving forward fast enough. But as I mentioned earlier, I kind of had to get out of my own way a little bit. And I saw it as like a position of strength among my people. And then also navigating through the pandemic, which as any entrepreneur, I mean, if there were an award that we could just get for surviving this thing, I think we should all get it. And I think that I came out having had close confidants that I navigated through the pandemic with, but I started to imagine what it would have been like with a board. And when that started to really sort of settle in for me, I realized it was truly time. And knowing that there's a tremendous amount of economic opportunity on the other side of this pandemic for all businesses, I realized that a board would help me keep my head on straight, would help challenge decisions that needed to be challenged, support me in things that needed supported in. And then I also saw it as a gift to my second in command, my COO, who I really look at as my equal. I just personally guarantee all the stuff. She doesn't have to do any of that, not as an owner. And so I saw it as a gift to her as well, where we could guide this company in a way that would be influenced by people that were more seasoned than us, people that sort of saw things that were in our blind spots. And so looking at sort of navigating through the next couple of years, which is a 3-year commitment, when it really sort of settled in for me, I got excited about these 3 years beginning this year, and how they're going, the dividends that this engagement with the board over these 3 years will pay itself forward for many, many years beyond what I decide to continue for my role to be in the company, or as our team expands, we open up additional offices. We want to go international. We have really big ambitions, and not having to do that alone was something that was oddly comforting for me, because previously I was comforted by doing it alone. And I don't know if it was a size or a size of revenue but there was just something in me that clicked, tied to the pandemic, tied to the opportunity, tied to the gift that it really would give my company beyond just me as the founder, co-founder and CEO.
Thanks, Kit. And again, just being able to have the honor of sitting on the first board meeting, it was just great. Some of the conversations and watching you and your co-founder, your COO, you could see like, wow, you're right, didn't think about that. So part of the role of the board, at least the board of advisors that COBA puts together, that Ty puts together, is really not about telling you answers, because we don't necessarily have the answers. I mean, Kit has the answers. It's really about asking the questions. So have you thought about, what about this? Have you thought about that? You know, how does this compare? So opening those questions, I think, is a whole different perspective. It's not somebody saying, do this and do that. You know that. It's really saying, what are some things to think about? Madhu, talk a little bit about who you should have on your board. I mean, again, he's a very creative guy, but he's also a business guy. What does someone like that need, or what do these people need?
I think the starting point for that, to figure out who you should have on your board, is a little bit of a self-introspection. Figuring out what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, what are the things you're uncomfortable with. So that's one part, because you need to fill those gaps with these advisors. The second part is from your business viewpoint. For example, and this is more from a functional viewpoint. For example, if you're a technology person, right, and your expertise is in product development, going deep into technology, but you're missing out on issues around, let's say, financing, the go-to-market piece, etc., then that gives you another sense of what kind of skill sets do you need from your advisors to complete that team. So these are two major things that you would look at to say, who should I have on my board? A natural tendency is to bring in people you're comfortable with. And that's a very common mistake. So it starts with family, because you have a few family members and you think you have a board, right? And invariably that's not effective. The same thing is to get your accountant, attorney, etc., and call them the board. Same thing, that doesn't work. So identifying what are the skill sets that you need, that becomes very important. So we use a simple, 3-letter acronym to say what you should be looking for, right? The P for physics, right? Physics is to be very effective. What do you have and what are you missing? So look for those skills, look for that experience. Chemistry, obviously you want to have people who you can get along with, who have the same vision, right? Who have a reputation for being straight, reputation for, going along the right path, not taking shortcuts, etc., because you want that credibility in your advisor. So the chemistry part is very important. At the same time, you don't want that person to be a yes man, a yes woman, right? You want that person to be able to tell you to your face that they don't like this idea, or they challenge this idea and they kind of push you into a little bit of a zone of discomfort so that you can really think about it without being wedded to the idea. So that's the chemistry part. And the last part is, as you scale, you need to take them along, because you're expecting them to share their expertise with you. So how do you compensate them? So there has to be an M part of the math part of that equation to say, how do you compensate your board members? So typically, for younger companies, since you're really generally short of cash, the compensation tends to be in the form of some equity, right? And once the financial institutions come in, et cetera, and cash flow is much higher, then typically, board members go on retainers. Sometimes they have specific fees for meetings. So depending on what level of involvement you want from your advisors or later your board members, you can figure out how to compensate them, not equity, but cash. Right? And public companies, of course, they go mostly all cash because the compensation packages for their board members are quite substantial. So it's always a gradual step up, but right in the beginning, equity.
And let's talk just briefly about the COPA program. So one of the things we decided to do, again, with COPA, Council of Board Advisors, is get a group of folks, and again, Madhu, myself, Sid, many of us, Eric in this room, Raj, have actually participated as an advisor. We tried to make it really simple, and what we do is we ask the company to pay a set fee, 10,000, I think it's per year, or 15 or something like that. And the board member gets a very small stipend just to, again, we want to show value for the work, the relationship between the two companies. But as I think Madhu said, it's a great way to get you started in the process. It teaches you the discipline, the process. You start to think about, wow, the impact. And I can tell you that every single company that we've worked with as a COPA board, and every company that I've been involved with as just an advisor or board member, you see value. You're going to have an increase in revenue. I can almost guarantee it, because it's opening up your mind and you're thinking about the big picture as opposed to how do I get through the next week. Let me end up with, Kit, take a moment and say, what do you want to accomplish from your board?
I'm sorry, I think you asked that before and I didn't answer. I swear I wasn't being coy. As the CEO, I have two things, call them sets of metrics that I'm focused on at our company. One is the financial metrics, as you could imagine, because we are a self-funded company, and how are we going to achieve those? We have one day I think we'll maybe call this a proprietary budgeting process because of how we actually look at the people in the process and how, from a budgeting standpoint, I'm not the kind of entrepreneur that looks at the bottom line first and says, how much money do I want to potentially take out of the company this year? We really I would call it middle out. We start in the middle where we look at our management labor and our direct labor. How much is based on data can we pay these people? And then what do we need to go out there on the top line to get to be able to keep that team intact? And then bonuses tied to some net operating income numbers to be able to fund bonuses. I love writing bonus checks. It makes me very, very happy because that means that we hit our numbers across the board. So that's one set. The other set is our DEI numbers, because we truly do want to become, I said the United States of Look Listen, but we really want to be this sort of version of the world that we want to live in, which is diverse. And so in constructing this board, what I realized was that in order to make sure that we're hitting those numbers, to have a board that really understands that we may give in some cases on the finance side to be able to keep more of our diverse employees during tough times. But I do not want to give on our DEI metrics. And so having a board that is going to help advise us to make sure that both of those things are on the rails. So ultimately, that's what we're hoping to achieve with our board. And what does that translate to? Well, one of the board members has agency experience and has exited companies, is also an investor in companies. And what I look for from him is, well, based on your agency experience, are we starting to make some of the right strategic bets from a service standpoint? What are we missing? What could potentially be on the horizon? Because those things are going to keep boat afloat and headed in the direction that I want on the finance side and on the diversity side. So ultimately, it's those couple of things and sort of the journey to get there is what I'm looking for the board to help out with.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Last comments from your perspective. If you could sum up, what's the real value of a board for these entrepreneurs out there?
Yeah. It's tough being an entrepreneur, right? And it's also very lonely, especially if you don't have a co-founder or a founding team, etc. And part of the problem is that you really don't have anybody to talk to in terms of, alternatives, fears, ideas, etc. Because if you talk to your leadership team, for example, about an exit, they will assume the exit is going to happen and they will exit before you do.
They've already bought
Right.
the Ferrari.
So it's a very lonely place. And the second part, of course, is the fact that you are playing multiple roles. You're shareholder, you're the CEO, right? You're the mentor to your employees. Sometimes you're their friend as well, because you may have your college buddies or whoever else as part of the company. So you have wearing multiple hats, and it becomes very confusing. And a board, whether it's a board of advisors, board of directors, of creating some formal structure around that helps you differentiate these roles. So when you're in the board meeting, right, and you're presenting as a CEO, you're not presenting as the owner of the company. And that makes a huge difference to what value you get. Because these two roles are different, and it's very hard in a normal context to differentiate these roles. And that's really one of the important reasons why you need a third-party board of advisors.
I agree. Well, folks, I hope you've enjoyed, again, some candid comments about why we're going to open up for questions. We're going to open up for questions in just a second.
Yes.
Eric, myself, would be delighted to talk to you. If you're interested in hearing more about the COPA process, we'd be delighted. Sit down with you, kind of brainstorm with you and say what keeps you up at night. That's the question I asked. I think, Kit, I asked you that for what keeps you up at night?
She did. She asked me that question.
And I didn't, just the business things. I didn't want anything else, just the business stuff. But anyway, we'd be delighted to talk with you. I think it's something that, again, if you're at a company, if you're profitable, you're kind of at that stage, it's an inflection point, you want to go to the next level. And I think the great thing about it is folks like Madhu and many of the people in this room who've said, I want to give back. They're here, they have one goal, and you heard this, you saw this in spades in your first board meeting. All they care about is Kit and Look Listen. And that's a powerful thing to think these folks that have been very successful, they only care about my success, my company's success. So with that, Maya, questions? Anybody, questions?
Yes, who's ready for, your hand went up first, so
Okay.
coming to you.
What's your name?
Thanks for the good session. My name is Vignesh. Thanks, Madhuji, for a lot, and also the whole team for it. And you spoke a little bit about the corporate governance and how it is important about it. Question is around the CEO pay that the board kind of directs for. You have one extreme where the Tesla CEO is taking $2,400 million, which is $200 million per month. So what did the board do right there? What did they do wrong there? And number two, how would you rate the performance of the CEO from a diversity scale?
So let me start with the first one, then I'll open it up. So the first thing, again, one of the things we're talking about primarily today is an advisory board. The challenge you get with I don't want to say ego CEOs that are public company boards, public company CEOs that have been very successful, and everybody wanted to get in his deal when you talk about Tesla. And again, the issue is he's structured in such a way that he got paid on performance, and he didn't get anything he wasn't entitled to. That was the performance metrics that the board agreed to. Nobody thought he would ever make them. Nobody ever thought he would make them, and he did. Saying that, the advisory board, as I said, that's a much more of a tactical compensation issue. Typically, the COBA board and most board of advisors might ask questions, but typically, Kit owns 100% of the company. So we can tell him all we want when we think he should get paid, but the reality is our role is to have him think about the business, not about a tactical thing. Anything else you guys want to add on that?
For the record, so I set a policy where no
Yes.
male in our company gets paid more than a woman in our company. So I don't make any, I don't make any more than the highest ranked woman in my company. So that's the power of the CEO, right? It goes back to, so I went to art school, and then later I went to business school, and I would highly encourage that order. All right?
Yeah.
And what it allowed for me to do was to be able to open up a level of creativity. And when I went to B school later, understood that this is maybe the way that people have done it so far, but you have the latitude to do it however you want, and especially when you're 100% owner of a company. So I wanted to chime in with that to emphasize the point of the power that the CEO has. And when, of course, when it's a publicly traded company, there's a level of accountability to the shareholders. But I'm a conscious capitalist, and so in conscious capitalism, you talk about stakeholders, not shareholders.
Yeah.
Shareholders are one of the stakeholders, but you
Right.
also have communities of stakeholders and those kind of things. So.
Now, saying that, one more thing, I want to address your second question, then I want Madhu to speak about it. One of the things that if you're in that process of your advisory board, I think you should say, sometime in the first year, let's sit down and I want you to grade me. I want you to give me honest feedback on how I'm performing, and one of those should absolutely be the DEI. I agree, but again, you've got to recognize the role of the advisory board, which is really to question the CEO about what they're trying to accomplish and maybe some other ways to accomplish that. Madhu.
Bad habits are equal opportunity. Right? You see the same trends everywhere. You know, companies like AIG, Tesla, Computer Associates, eventually the CEO went to jail. Right? You may wonder, what was the board doing? Right? It depends on how the board was stacked. Well, same thing with Satya. Whole host of companies, right? So a lot of times when you look at public company boards, you wonder, is this an independent board or is this a dependent board? And the answer is not very clear a lot of times. But when you're starting your company, when you're in your journey to building your company, you have the choice. If your intent is not to get a board to approve everything that you're proposing, that's not the idea, right? Here, your idea is to get as much wisdom so that you don't make mistakes, so that you can seize challenges and you can achieve goals. And there is a group of people who have your interest in mind and who are urging you along, challenging you to do this, take this higher step. That's really the reason why you want to have the board. So the moment that motivation gets clouded, you get into all these kinds of issues.
I think we had one more question. Do we have time for one or two more?
We have
Maya?
time for 2 more questions, and they're
Okay.
both up here, it looks like. Okay, so I'm going to hand it to you, and then if you could pass it up.
Oh.
All right. This is up to all of you, but what would you guys look at the pros and cons of having individual advisors that you go to versus a board
Great
of
question.
advisors?
Madhu, you want to start it?
Yeah, excellent. I think that's
Great
a very...
question.
All-in-ones have a lot of compromises, right? And that's why you need to identify what gaps you have
Yes.
and look at specialists who can fill those gaps. I mean, like, for example, you were saying international business, right? Now, that's not a common skill set. So if you are looking for that, and then you're also looking for agency expertise, right? Somebody who has scaled and you don't normally get it in the same package. So it's very hard to find James Bond type of characters who can be everything for everybody. It doesn't work. So you pick and choose and you assemble a board. And again, you keep the number, somewhere between 3 and 5 so that it's manageable. Otherwise, you have so much input that or between them, they have so much dissonance that it doesn't work for you. So
It's a really interesting question, and I would just maybe lean a little bit on my own experience with why I like to even collaborate with groups of people. And it's because the one-on-one relationship is one dynamic, but when you bring a group of people together, it's a completely different dynamic. And I actually, for this company, my co-founder, we knew each other when we were kids, and we played in punk bands as teenagers and in college. And we brought this like band dynamic to what we were doing. And we were, that was great for a period of time in that one-on-one relationship, and I would go out and have these one-on-one relationships. But then when we pulled together a management team, I realized that making the music reference, when it was just me and him playing when we were teenagers, it was one thing. But when we got into college and we added a couple more people to a band or whatever, it was a whole different dynamic, and we made different music together. And so, as I was talking about the pandemic, I got tired of being so alone. And you're right. I mean, it's lonely, not just at the top, but as an entrepreneur. And if you're in a committed relationship too, you're likely that person that you're in the committed relationship didn't sign up to be an entrepreneur either, you know, or they didn't sign it up. So you've got to find sort of a way out of that, which is why I also recommend entrepreneurs have great relationships with therapists too. A good therapist is very, very important as an entrepreneur. But it's that group dynamic. It's totally, and I know that my relationship with Karen can be of a certain dynamic, but when it's the other people in the room for the board in a board setting, it's going to be even different. And that's something that that's why I wanted to do it. So that's how I would say the difference is.
Let me just say one more thing too, and I'm a salesperson, but I can, one-on-one, I can talk almost anybody into anything. But when I'm in a group, they call it. They call my stuff. And so it causes you to be more accountable. And I agree 100%. Because yes. Yes.
Anyway, we try to figure out how the three, let's say, board members and the CEO might fit together as a working unit. And so we don't force anybody on the CEO, but we suggest kind of what we think after we get to know their business, what they might need. And so then you get this, you know, I sat in as the note taker on the first Look Listen meeting, right? And, you know, you just see the dynamic between Kit, his COO, Lisa, and the three board members, and it's different than if you had them one-on-one with each other, because everybody has a different perspective and a different way of looking at things. So that's the difference from my point of view.
100% agreed. So you can see, again, keep those mentors, keep those one-on-one relationships. Those are valuable. Kit and I have a separate relationship than our board relationship, but they're both very valuable. Yes?
Thank you so much. This is the panel discussion. I wanted to, be in part of it at this whatever level of the journey of entrepreneurship.
You're welcome.
So thank you so very much. First, I've got two set of questions. One is there a metrics for the board of advisors for the time as well as the equity? Because I do have some who are interested and they're like, okay, what do you expect from me? And of course, I have the way level of expectation, but what would be the fair level of expectation in terms of time and the equity I would be able to respectfully give it to them? Is there anything?
So I'll answer this because this is for COBA, so this is not for other advisors or boards that you use. For the COBA board, we're very specific. It's 25 hours a year for the board members, which is 4 board meetings at about 5 hours a board meeting and 1 hour of prep. So we're very clear. And the company, and they get literally, the company pays because we want the company to be invested, but the board members get a small stipend of which we ask all of them to give it to charity. So, but we want to make sure there's money changing hands. That's different. Madhu talked about if you're going to set up your own and you want more from them, you need to look at equity and other pieces, but COBA, we tried to make it simple so everybody understands it, and it's and you have to sign a contract Kit had to sign a contract that said he's not going to call me and say, Karen, I need $1 million. Are you sure you can't put $1 million in? And I need to say, and my deal with Kit was I need to make sure that I don't say, well, Kit, can't you just pay me as a consultant? I mean, I would do a really good job. Just pay me a consultant fee. No. So it's a very contractual relationship. 25 hours a year for the board member. And that's very specific that the CEO has got to, again, respect his board members for what their job is. Does that answer the question?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So a second one is there any certain revenue from your end, do you see that, okay, if it is that particular revenue, then it's, you have proven yourself? Because so anyone who give opportunities to women-led and entrepreneurs, kudos to them and cheers to them. Because what I feel generally is that there is always a pause, whether it's investment, whether it's an advisory board. I mean, I ask directly, and still there is a pause that comes. And I don't know if it's gender related or whatever, but then I've seen, is it a basically revenue, certain that you are at certain revenue, then only I'll be your advisor? I don't know, I wanted to have your take that what is your criteria generally to even evaluate that should I be in part of it?
So COBAs were pretty specific because we wanted to be, again, typically these are corporate executives. They've run fairly sizable companies. So the deal is we ask for the company to be profitable, to be at least $5 million in revenue, because below that, I'm not sure that someone like Madhu could be as much help, or Karen could be as much help. And then we're also looking for a coachable CEO. Those are the 3 criteria we're looking for COBA. We're pretty clear on it. That's different for other advisory boards. Madhu he and I can both go through and talk about the different options, but for the COBA board, we're pretty clear. And I think that's why we've had such great success over the last 10 years, is because we're pretty clear. Madhu knows what he's getting into. Karen knows what she's getting. Kit knows what he's getting into. So everybody is very clear up front. And again, Eric makes sure we all have the contractual agreement to make sure it's all stated. Does that help answer your question? Kind of?
Yes. Because it's certainly related to COBA, but I was asking in general.
In general.
I was asking in general that before even I reach out to Board of Advisor, is there something homework I need to do so that I don't respect the other, I don't respect you all or anyone whom I feel could be that, my strength, could fill that gap of my weakness.
Think of it as a recruitment activity, right? If you offered somebody a job, their first response would be a pause because they want to understand what exactly does this entail. It's the same thing for advisors, board members, mentors as well, right? So the clarity of thought in terms of presenting your vision and stating your expectation, right, and requesting them to be part of your journey, that needs to be structured well. And if that's not done, then it's a favor, and it will be a kind of an incomplete contract.
That's really well said, because I think, again, the way to make sure you get what you want and the board advisors don't feel they're being taken advantage of, it's a fair transaction, is be candid and lay out I would lay it out contractually, or at least at a minimum, written down. Say, this is what I'm looking for. And the person says that this is what I can provide. And then we talked about this too. I'm a big believer, define success. At the end of the year, for you to say A+, what does that look like? And for the board member to say A+, what does that look like? We've gone over? Is that right, Maya? Or do we have a...
Yes.
Come on, one more question.
Well, actually, I want to ask Sebastian, do we have any questions from the virtual audience?
Oh, sorry.
Okay. Well, I'm going to let you guys connect with Kit, Madhu, and Karen. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you guys so much for this awesome panel. If you guys have additional questions, feel free to connect with them. They'll be around for a couple more minutes, I think. Right, guys? Okay. Awesome. Thank you guys again for coming to our May monthly meeting. Our next meeting will be May 25th. It's our workshop, Valuation and ESOP, with Greg from Integra, one of our amazing sponsors. We hope to see you there. It's at ATDC, which is one of our incredible partners as well. Again, I'm Maya. If you don't know who I am, I'll be reaching out to you. We hope to see you there. Thanks again for coming to another TIE Atlanta meeting. Have a great night, guys.